I'd rather be able to see people. And I don't know if that's acceptable or not, but that's what it's going to be. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming tonight. There's some people in the audience that I should mention to acknowledge. Tom Hester is here. Let's give Tom a hand. Funniest person in Austin, my God. You know, not some downstream guy. So, and John Williams is here. They graced us with their presence. It's really a privilege. So thank you very much for coming to this event. You know, we've rolled it together by the seat of our pants, and all my friends and supporters that have showed up to help me get this thing through. So now, this initially was a book launch for this book here, The Boxcar Tourist, and Adrienne Harrell, aka Chaotic, of Cap City fame as well. But she has a book called Korea, Her Story. So I talked to Adrienne about us doing an event together, and I'm glad that I did, because I love Adrienne. She brings good people with her, and she's a sweet lady, and very dear to me. So this book came about. I'm an addicted writer. I can't help but write. Every night I get in my apartment and I sit at the computer and I write shit. And, I chronicle different stories, things that in my life. And at one point, Christine, this is Christine.
Hello, everybody.
Christine Korn, as it were.
Christine,
That's her maiden name. Anyway.
Yeah.
So Christine started looking at this compilation of files and stories, and she'd heard a lot of these stories firsthand from me just rambling, telling the stories. And so she said, I like your stories, and I think it'll make a good book, but there's no consistent thread in it. So I did some things with the Austin Writers League, and that's one of the things they stressed, that a book needs to have a story arc. So we really struggled to tie all this together, because it's stuff, you know, when I was 5, the first stuff is when I was 5 years old, and living in a house literally 10 feet away from a railroad track. So the trains would pass, and my older brothers and sisters would take me out to look at the train, and it was just fascinating to see this old steam locomotive roll by. And so ever since then, I've had this fascination with trains. And then when I got older, I was a runaway, hitchhiked back and forth to California because of I had this fascination from watching Annette Funicello and Frankie Avalon. So I had this fascination with the beach. So I hitchhiked to California, and I did this so many times that in those days, in the 60s, if the police saw you, they would stop, put you in jail, and call your parents, and make them wire money for you to ride a bus home. So that got really old, because I wanted to get the hell out of Lubbock, Texas. And they kept sending me back. So I learned how to ride freight trains. And
it is a skill.
yeah,
It is.
so mostly between Texas and California, but I got bored with the same old rail routes and learned how to ride trains up and down the coast of California. And then once I did that, I found out how to go from San Francisco area and Sacramento across the through Donner Pass and across the Great Salt Desert. And that's the Union Pacific. And from there, I could go through Laramie and Cheyenne and get to at Cheyenne, go south go on the Burlington Northern Railroad and go to Lubbock. And once I got to Lubbock, I could hitchhike home. So so it's, you know, it's a lot of, there's probably 20 different stories about riding the trains and, you know, everything. The experiences were very similar. So how many times can you talk about gazing down long vistas in the mountains with snow when they all sound themselves exactly the same? It becomes really repetitive. So Christine was able to sort all this out for me and to establish a good, strong story arc that made sense. So that's how we came up with this book. So anyway, yeah, it's Christine Louise Korn. She's Norwegian by descent. So her name, Christine with a K, and her maiden name is Korn with a K.
So the joke
Yeah.
is if we ever got married, I'd be Chrissy Corn Cox, which is.
Yeah.
We're
So
gonna avoid that.
initially I wanted to call the story Freight Train Blues, but there's too much baggage with that title. So,
Why don't you, may
so
I?
Christine was researching and looking up hobo terms, and boxcar tourist is a hobo term for a hobo. And then she came up with this, another hobo term for getting wise to yourself, screw your nut. So really, that's funny, I like that, so.
And there is a website that's almost ready to be launched called screwyournut.com.
Yeah.
It really is. So,
I wasn't referring to you when I.
oh, good Lord.
Anyway, so, let me see here. It's in sections, and the first one is Tenderfoot Rascal, about my errant ways as a child in Lubbock. Oh my God. And then The Siren's Call is about going out to California to hook up with friends Lance Copeland. You probably know that name. Lance Copeland and Gene Glasscock. And they convinced me to drop out of college at Texas Tech and go out to California. So that's what Siren's Call is about. But then when I got to California, I was living in the Sierra Nevadas, and I had to have a job as a resort community. So the man that leased me the house I was living in helped me get a job as a firefighter for a hotshot crew. So that's what I did in California for 3 years. Is I fought brush fires, forest fires, all over Southern California. And then from there, from there I just went through a big change in my life when I got divorced and decided to move to Los Angeles and pursue an acting career. So that's what the next section is about, is my time in California. That time was interrupted when my friend Joe Ely was touring and came through and was doing a gig at the Palomino Club in North Hollywood. So I went to see Joe, and all the members of his band were guys I grew up with. So Joe convinced me to become his road manager, and I traveled around the U.S. and Europe with Joe for some time. So there's a big section there about Joe. And then in 1986, I started my own business called the Comedy Gym. I was traveling from Austin to San Antonio to Houston and Dallas. Every week I was driving 1,200 miles a week to go teach my classes all over Texas, and eventually made it to Vancouver, Canada, and did classes there as well. So I did that for 28 years until I burned out. But I love comedy, and I love the people in comedy, and You know, it's just, why get involved in anything where you're not gonna enjoy yourself, not gonna laugh? That's my perspective of that. And then, that section of the book is called Bada Bing, Bada Boom. And then the next section is called Sidetracked, because of my, how did,
You became a poster child for the healthcare system in the United States.
I was,
Sorry.
I was trying to think of how Bernadette Mason put it. She's, you know, but anyway, due to my errant ways, I went through a series of severe illness and had liver and kidney transplants. So I've got parts. Yeah, they won't tell me who the guy was, but anyway, I got all my parts from him and somehow made it through and lived. So that's the essence of Sidetracked. And somehow it brought me to this day here with you. And thank you all for being here and being part of this. It's been great. So should I read a little of the book?
Of course.
Yes.
Okay, this is in the first section, and it's called Under the Light of a Full Moon. I was born just before 1 in the morning under the light of a full moon on October 29th, 1948, at Lubbock Memorial Hospital in Lubbock, Texas. My name is Samuel, which in Hebrew means called by God. Giving me the name Samuel was an intentional act by my parents. Before I was conceived, my parents' marriage was in trouble. The minister advised them to reunite and have another child to commemorate their reconciliation. Thus, I was born 9 months later, the fourth of 5 children. At the time of my birth, my parents lived in relative seclusion in the Plains Baptist Assembly church camp, where my dad worked as a custodian. The place was paved with dirt roads and was located deep in the canyons on the edge of the Caprock, the geological dividing line separating the Great Plains of Texas and the hillier terrain farther south. To say that Lubbock is flat would be a gross understatement. Just as the horizon of the sea lacks distinguishing characteristics, there are so very little the little things to break the sidelines. The Great Plains Life building was the only thing we could see. It was a tall 20-story building. There's no mountains or trees to break the line of vision, plus all that appears to exist in the cloudless blue sky above and the dusty brown earth below. Summers in Lubbock were hot, but the climate was arid, so the air became cool in the evening when the sun went down. I slept beneath a window that had a noisy swamp cooler that pumped moist, cool air into my bedroom. So, that's so much for that. It's kind of long. You know? So, what about, my gosh.
Do you want, I can read one, do you want me to read one?
Now this chapter is called Help Along the Way. Freight yards can be lonely places. The last refuge in a cold, dark, and lonely freight yard in any city was a wooden boomer shack. Boomers were itinerant workers hired by the railroads at the turn of the century who built small, primitive wooden shacks for shelter that they moved with the completion of each section of the track. The shack's single wooden door kept out the blowing winds and rain and ice and snow. And on a cold night in an unfamiliar freight yard, a warm boomer shack was like the Conrad Hilton to me. So there was these, in every freight yard, there's these little wooden shacks, boomer shacks, and they have a cast iron stove. So I would find these on a cold night and snowing, I would find these boomer shacks in there, they had cast iron stoves. So they had coal burning, they were coal burning stoves, so they had coal fires and would go in and get warm. Those things would get so hot that they would glow red. The other place where you'd find those wood coal burning stoves was in the caboose. Now cabooses don't exist anymore. They've replaced them. There's just a red light on the back of a freight train now. But in those days, they had a beautiful caboose. And in the caboose was a water cooler, a bathroom, and bunk beds. It was beautiful. And if you've ever seen a caboose, there's the back end of it had little windows on the side. Well, when you get in the caboose, you can climb up a metal ladder and get to a bunk up high. They had two bunks, a lower bunk and an upper bunk. The upper bunk was called the angel seat. And it was beautiful just to climb up there, and the heat would rise and warm you, and you could watch the towns roll by out the window. So that was my, and there, one of the really difficult parts of putting the book together is I probably took 25 different train rides. So, and they all were pretty much the same shit, it's the same old story. So that's what Christine did that was so beautiful, is put them together and meld them and make them work together. So that it wasn't the same, describing the same scenes over and over and over again, but still making a consistent thread through it. So that's what we did there. Christine, would you like to read?
Mm-hmm.
All right. If you would please welcome my sweetheart and co-author, Christine.
Thank you all for coming. I've heard about a lot of you, but I haven't met you in person, so thank you so much for coming out. This is a really, it's one of those moments, in the hustle and bustle where you could just kind of stop and relax and just listen to a good story. And I hope you enjoy the stories tonight, because this was a labor of love for me. Sam had told me stories time and time again. And honestly, when he first started telling me the stories, I thought, okay, this guy is either a compulsive pathological liar, because no one man could have all of these experiences in one life, or well, that's what I thought. So anyway, or woefully confused. But he told me all of these stories, and I thought, my God, you've got to write this down. And so this has been a real labor of love for me, and I'm just really happy that you're out here tonight. So this first chapter is the first chapter when Sam was 5 years old. It's called Wanderlust. It was 1953, and I was 5 years old. I was riding in the car with my mom when I spotted a man sitting in the door of an open boxcar of a slow-moving freight train headed west. "Who's that?" I asked. "Oh, some old bum," she answered. My curiosity had been sufficiently aroused. The following day, I quickly became bored with bouncing my red rubber ball, my red rubber ball on the sidewalk, and decided to take a stroll up the highway. 2 blocks away, I spied an empty brown boxcar parked on a sidetrack with its doors open. I reached up with both hands and pulled myself up and climbed inside. I sat in the doorway with my feet dangling to and fro, feeling kind of cocky and right at home. I had a nice view from my perch and watched the cars whiz past on the nearby street. No one seemed to notice or care. I soon grew weary of this misadventure, hopped down onto the rocky ground, and strolled across the street to a small neighborhood store. Outside stood 2 coin-operated vending machines. I dropped a nickel in the first one, and it coughed up a 16-ounce green glass bottle of 7-Up that I drank dry in a few greedy gulps. I popped a shiny quarter in the other machine, and it obligingly spat out a pack of Lucky Strikes. I took my loot, strolled back to my boxcar, and climbed back inside. A man noticed me walk across the highway and stopped to ask, "What's your name, son?" "My name is Sam Cox," I beamed. "Sam," he said, "where's your mommy and daddy?" I pointed west down the highway. The good-hearted stranger drove me home to my worried mom and dad, who were standing out in the front yard. "Where were you?" my mother asked. The man handed my dad the pack of Luckies, and my parents laughed and thanked him. My mom leaned over, lifted me into her arms, and whisked me into the house to give me a stern lecture about wandering off. But it was too late. My wanderlust adventures had begun. That's chapter 1. Can't you see little Sam Coffin, 5 years old, getting into mischief? He just got into mischief. I want to read a couple more. Is that all right? Is that... Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. This one is one of my favorite, called Old Time Religion. And my understanding is that Lubbock has the highest number, let's see, in the country, the most number of churches per capita of anywhere, or something crazy like that. So that's just sort of a backdrop for this chapter. It's called Old Time Religion. Okay. Church activities ruled our lives, and Sundays always meant church, church, and more church. My dad was the church janitor, and my mom was in charge of the nursery. Each and every week we had Sunday school in the morning, followed by the weekly sermon. My dad sat in front of me in church and wore flecks of white paint on the back of his ears, neck, and dark hair as he sat in his Sunday suit. After morning church activities, we ate Sunday dinner, which was the meal of the week, and if we were lucky, consisted of fried chicken or a roast. After dinner, we'd return to church for a Sunday evening prayer meeting, choir practice, and events for teens. The boys attended Royal Ambassadors, and girls went to Girls Auxiliary. I always had to miss the wonderful world of Disney on account of Sunday prayer meetings. It was a terrible mistake for the church to take on the likes of Walt Disney in the battle to win my heart and soul. Poor Jesus didn't stand a chance with me against the likes of Robin Hood, Zorro, and Jiminy Cricket. If Sunday's activities weren't enough to save a boy's soul, the church also offered vacation Bible school and summer church camp. Being from a poor family, this was my only summer vacation. Church camp was kind of like Cub Scouts without the uniforms and tents, but with a lot more Bibles. Our activities were replete with lots of sermons, swimming, hiking, and arts and crafts that attempted to make the snake and scorpion-infested camps more interesting. Camp began early each day with breakfast in the camp cafeteria, immediately followed by prayer meetings with plenty of Bible thumping and hellfire and brimstone sermons that warned us of the wages of a sinful existence. If a boy wasn't saved after a week of brainwashing, he was pretty much a lost cause. One year, I saw a group of boys kill a large diamondback rattlesnake just after breakfast. The horrifying sound was more of a buzzing than a rattle, and the racket sent chills up and down my spine as I watched the boys corner the reptile, kill it, cut off its rattles, and spill its innards on the reddish-brown soil. Another year, a child drowned in the camp pool, which gave me not exactly nightmares so much as a palpable fear while swimming in the very same pool. The well water that filled the pool was so cloudy that seeing underwater was impossible, and on the day it happened, I wondered if I had swum next to the dead body of the unfortunate child who had drowned. On Sundays, the weekly sermons always ended with a tearful final hymn and the minister of the hour making a sorrowful appeal for the congregation to come to their senses, confess their sins, and beg for the Lord's forgiveness. It was during one of these Sunday sermons that I was saved. When church leaders asked, "Do you want everlasting life?" it was foolish to think that I'd make any other choice than to be saved, especially when considering that I was being asked this question while surrounded by weeping adults. After making my choice to be saved, I relished the attention bestowed upon me as I strolled up the aisle to the altar. I shook hands with the preacher and felt the relief of knowing that I too would have everlasting life and avoid the unforgiving eternal fires of hell. My repentance and redemption was well received by my mom, but doubted by my dad. I guess he thought that I was a chip off the old block and would soon show my true colors by doing something sinful. Thus was the case, when it was so very obvious who had scribbled MASCOX in large red crayon letters on the side of the church.